Hey YouTubers, welcome back to another episode of As Above, So Mid-Mo. Today we are going to be finishing up the loom building project. This will be the second phase to the previous video. Today what we're going to work on is getting the holes drilled and measured out for the nails, which are going to be the pegs for the yarn once you start weaving. What you're going to need for that is some sort of measuring device. I like to use this thing here. It's got that right angle on there. Helps me be a little more precise. But if you don't have that, little ruler will work just fine. So the first thing we want to do is make sure we're working on the top side. If you did pick out a top side, you know, we want to use the side where the nails are closer to the bottom. We want that to be the bottom screws, I'm sorry. And so when we're driving the nails in, they don't end up hitting those screws. So I wrote on here that I got the top side here in front of me. So before we get to spacing out the distance in between the nails, we want to just simply draw a line that we can follow as a resource, just to keep everything uniform, straight, and that'll help things look a little more proper down the road. So to do that, what we want to do is get your tape measure, your ruler, your measuring device, and find the middle, give or take some, and put your ruler right up to the edge here that you're measuring from. Find out where, get it flush. And here it looks like we're going to go with 1/2 inch. So I'm going to put a mark there. Then I'm going to go down to the other end of this side and another one at 1/2 inch. Then when we get our mark on this side, then we can draw our line. Hold your ruler down real good and tight, or that sucker will run away on you. And then you end up with something sort of like that, just a straight line, and that'll just give us something to follow once we start putting our marks in for the nail holes. And yeah, that'll just help us stay on track there. So we'll do the same thing on this side. Once you've got both of your side lines drawn here, then you want to find the spot. You don't want to go too far up on this because we cut our corner off here, so you want to find out where your corner nails are going to be. And so let's say we're going to have one right here, roughly speaking, and that'll put this one over here at the same area. So that means that our top line needs to be about, measuring from this inside edge this time, looks like we need to be at about 1/4 inch would give us plenty of leeway. Might be a little shorter, but I'd rather have more room to play with than not enough. So we'll do 1/4 inch on this side too. And draw our line. And when you're doing this, you want to be pretty precise. You want to be as close to perfect as anybody can get. And so now you see we've got our triangle drawn, and right in here, that's where one corner nail is going to be. This is where the other corner nail will be, and this is going to be the bottom here. And I usually don't put a nail here, which I'll tell you about later. So now that we got that, now we can focus on spacing the nails out. So what I do before I even get the nails out or do anything with the nails is I measure from this here this joint here, the base, the right angle, from this line, I measure 5/16 of an inch from this line. So this meeting point here is where I start on both sides. And I start on the bottom here because I want it to be the exact same on this side. I want each nail to be parallel with the other. And when you start to weaving on this, you'll understand why. But you do want them to be parallel. So if you start here on both sides, then you can work your way up and it'll be even. So like I said, 5/16 from this side. So I take my fancy little tape ruler right triangle thingy-majigger. You know what I mean. Put it on that line there. On this line, as well as on this line, and you should have pretty close to a right angle there. And then you just start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, put a mark. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, put a mark. Every 5/16 of an inch you're going to put a mark. So once you get both sides measured out, it's a good idea to go ahead and count each side. On this particular one, I had 17 on this side, so you want to count and make sure that you have 17 on the other side. Just sometimes you skip one or miss a 1/16 of an inch, and that 1/16 of an inch can throw the whole thing off. But just make sure you got the same number on each side. And then when we go to the top, we're going to change it up. We did 5/16 on the sides here. Both sides we did 5/16. On the top, we're going to do 7/16 spaced apart. And that'll eventually leave us with the same number of nails on each side. So you have 17 here, 17 here, and then you'll also have 17 here if you do it 7/16 apart. So you can see I got my notches drawn on there at 5/16 on both sides. Now we're going to do the top with 7/16. Okay, now we've got all of our spaces measured out. We did 5/16 on both sides here. We ended up with 17. And we did 7/16 spacing on the top here. And you can see that the spacing is just a little bit wider apart. And that'll be important later on when we go to weaving, and I'll show you then. But now what we want to do is we're going to get ready to prep these measurements for drilling holes. So we're going to be using just a regular old trim nail is what I like to use. This is on the box it says that it's a 4D nail. It's what is it, 1.5 inches long. You can kind of play around with this. You don't have to use this exact nail. It's just the one that is a little bit stronger when I'm working with harder woods, and I prefer the nail to not bend when I'm hammering it into the wood. But before we go to hammering, what I want to do, what I found that works for the drilling process, is to go ahead and tap these nails into each one of these marks, and it sort of makes just a little pilot hole. So you just put it right on your mark and give it a little pop like that, and it'll just put you a little hole right there on your line where your measurement is. And the reason I do that is because sometimes when you go to using your drill, or if you're using a drill press even, what happens is that drill bit will sort of spin around and go all over the place, and it's hard to get it to dig in exactly where you want it to go. So by putting this little nail hole in each little mark, you can be just a little bit more precise, and this isn't necessary. You can skip this step if you want to, but it really helps you get that straight line, which really makes the piece look a little more aesthetically pleasing, I think. So again, this part's up to you. You can skip it if you want to. I like to do it just to get that precision, that straight edge, and it helps things flow a little better as we go down the road. So now we've got our holes started. We hammered the nails in there just a little bit, just to make sort of a pilot hole for the drill bit to go into a little easier. We're going to be using a a 1/16 inch drill bit. It's good to use a drill bit for whatever size nail you're going to use. You want the drill bit to just be slightly more narrow than the nail itself, especially when you're working with oak. You want that to be pretty close to the same size as the nail, just because it's so difficult to nail into those harder woods. And the other thing to note is that if you're using your regular handheld drill or your drill press, you want the drill bit to go in about half the length of the nail. So here, I don't know if you can see it very well, but I got it set up on this drill press that I'm going to drill about 1.25 inches or so, or about half the length of the nail into the wood. So you end up with your nail just a little bit, about halfway in the wood. That's what you're going for. You don't have to get super precise with this, as long as you have your hole drilled at least 3/4 of the way of the length of your nail. It should be pretty smooth sailing to hammer it in the rest of the way. And I do warn you, with harder woods, you're going to want to drill that hole completely out, or you're going to have a bunch of bent nails. But today we're working with maple, so that shouldn't be a problem. That's pretty easy to hammer into. And yeah, so what we do is the holes you got lined up here, you just turn your drill on or your drill press and go wild with it. The reason I use the drill press is because, again, it's a little more uniform. When you're using your handheld drill, you're not as precise. You're always sort of moving around, and that way you'll end up with nails that are all different angles. And when you can use your drill press, you get one uniform angle that's just about right, straight up and down. And that's what we're aiming for. We're not aiming for perfection, but as close as we can get. Okay, so it doesn't matter where you start with this. You got to drill all the holes out at some point. So anywhere works. Okay, now that we got our holes drilled out, you're inevitably going to be left with some roughness here, just due to your drill bit and how it tears up the wood a little bit. And I already kind of did a rough sanding on this thing before I even drilled holes, but this is the time that you definitely want to do all the sanding and get it out of the way before we put the nails in, and before we stain it or paint it or whatever you plan on doing in that aspect. So you can just use just a regular old piece of sandpaper you get at the hardware store and kind of take that edge off, or you can really go to town and use a power sander and just get all the angles sort of smoothed out and get the sides, the edges where your screw holes are, get all those things real smoothed out, just so that stain lays on real easy and it looks good. Like, it just gives it a smooth finish. There's no sharp edges for the yarn to get caught on, nothing like that. So we're going to go ahead and sand it as much or as little as you want. I like to sand just the pencil markings off. Not that they're going to show through the stain anyways, but it gives me a good idea that I've sanded her down enough. Get those sharp edges out of the way, and then we'll be ready for some paint, stain, whatever you feel like. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Alright, now we are ready to paint, stain, or skip that. You might want some gloves for this next step. We're going to be using some of this wood putty to fill in our screw holes and what other imperfections are left. Say you got a gap on one of your joints, we can stuff that full of some of this wood filler and sand that down as well. And then that way people will be wondering how you made it look like one piece. So I just put a little on my finger. I've mixed what little I had left with some water just to make it a little easier to work with. It likes to fall down in those gaps and holes a little better if it's a little more liquefied.